paid program and does not necessarily express the views or opinions of Equity Media, its management, staff, or affiliates of WBOK 1230.
Now, it's the Monitor's Mic with your host, Stella Cement.
Welcome to the Monitor's Mic, where we talk oversight, policing, and you. I'm Stella Cement, your host and the Independent Police Monitor for the City of New Orleans, and with me is Chriselle McGowan, our Deputy Police Monitor. This show is your go-to source for discussing policing, law enforcement oversight, and how it impacts you. We're here to inform and empower you by unraveling the complexities of policing, updating you on the consent decree, and engaging in conversations that matter on policing oversight in the community. From the Office of the Independent Police Monitor, we offer an independent perspective on city government. The Office of the Independent Police Monitor, otherwise known as OIPM, serves as a crucial civilian oversight body for the New Orleans Police Department, NOPD. We ensure transparency and accountability within the police department by making sure that NOPD follows their policies, abides by the consent decree, and is compliant with all local, state, and federal laws. Our office operates independently from the NOPD and the federal monitors, allowing us to provide an impartial perspective on policing practices and investigations. What does all of that mean? What do we do day to day? Well, we take complaints of officer misconduct from the public and from police officers. We review misconduct investigations conducted by the NOPD's Internal Affairs, which is called the Public Integrity Bureau. We're on call 24 hours a day, every day of the year for officer-involved shootings and critical incidents. We will go to the scene and monitor the force investigation from start to finish. We're advisory members of the Use of Force Review Board, and we attend disciplinary hearings and provide guidance and assessments during deliberations. We run the Community Police Mediation Program, and we engage the community to ensure your voice, opinions, and concerns are heard. We, your hosts, are not police officers, but we are experienced lawyers from the criminal legal field. We're dedicated to transparency and accountability. We encourage you to call in with your questions, comments, and concerns today more than ever because we are talking about the consent decree and we want to hear your public comments. Now, please remember, while we may not be able to address individual cases, we are committed to following up with you if you have any questions on individual matters. So with that, let's learn more about today's guest. Chriselle?
Today we have Deputy Superintendent Nicholas Gernon, who leads the New Orleans Police Department's NOPD, Professional Standards and Accountability Bureau, also known as PSAB. Deputy Superintendent Gernon was born in Washington, D.C., but grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana. He joined the New Orleans Police Department in 2002. He first worked in the 1st District in the Night Patrol before being promoted to burglary detective. He has also worked as a narcotics and violent crime detective from 2007 to 2009 and as a homicide detective. And from 2007 to 2009 as a homicide detective. Gernon was promoted to sergeant in 2009 in the 8th District and rejoined homicide as a sergeant in 2012. In August 2015, Gernon was promoted to lieutenant and moved to the 6th District. In November 2016, he was again promoted and started leading districts and divisions, including the 8th District, the 7th District, and the Crime Lab. For the last 2 years, Deputy Chief Gernon has played a crucial role as the primary liaison between the City of New Orleans, the Department of Justice, and the consent decree monitors as the leader of PSAB. Under his leadership, PSAB monitors progress compliance with the consent decree, conducts all audits of department functions under the consent decree, coordinates the exchange of data, documents, and access among all relevant parties. The Bureau also conducts in-depth analysis of crime patterns, produces weekly statistical reports, and ensures that departmental operations adhere to established rules, regulations, orders, and policies. Additionally, PSAB writes and monitors the implementation of all departmental regulations, orders, and policies.
All right, now I know we're excited to begin, and I'm very excited to start asking a lot of questions to Chief Gernon. But before we do, we want to just jump in with a little bit of a disclaimer. Today, we really want to focus on consent decree related topics because right now, the city of New Orleans, we're in a public comment period. And that means that the public can submit questions and comments to the federal court for Judge Morgan to consider prior to ruling on the joint motion that's been filed for the NOPD to enter into sustainment. So as a result, the OIPM has held opportunities for public comment. I understand the NOPD has been conducting public forums all over the city that's been run by Chief Gernon, which is why he's here today. Regarding sustainment. And I know our PCABs have also been holding these meetings. Community partners have been holding these meetings like NOCOP. So the point is now's the time to talk about the consent decree, to talk about sustainment, to look backwards and look forwards. The federal monitors are going to be holding more public forums, both virtually and in public. I understand there will be in-person public forums being held on Monday and Tuesday, and before the end of this show, we will announce what those are. They will be held in New Orleans East and at the Nora Navra Library. The point is, this is a chance for us to ask about the consent decree, vocalize concerns or opinions, and be ready for the future fairness hearing that will be held by the court. So with that, let's talk consent decree and sustainment with Chief Gernon.
So first, let's go back a little bit and what exactly is the consent decree?
Well, first off, let me just say thank you for having me on, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to a wider, group of people than we can in just a public forum or in some of our other outreach efforts. I really appreciate the fact that the federal that the IPM, that the local police monitors, in fact, are here on the ground every single day and are really kind of in tune with the community's needs and concerns, and have taken a really proactive approach in ensuring that the community knows what's going on, and more importantly, knows how to have their voice be heard. So thank you for that. In response to what is a consent decree? Well, in our case, our consent decree, the City of New Orleans' consent decree, was formed after a series of tragic and brutal events. Let's just be honest here. Coming out of the post-Katrina years, we saw a number of just horrific events that the police department really imposed upon its citizens and upon our community. And the federal, government came down, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division came down and did a pattern and practice investigation. And they determined that there were a number of deficiencies in how the New Orleans Police Department had been run and how the city had run the New Orleans Police Department, stretching back decades, right? So this was not just a 5 or 10 year thing. I mean, we're talking about, all the way back into the 90s and the 80s and the 70s. I heard somebody mention recently, back to the Algiers 7 incident of the early 80s. And by identifying these deficiencies, they basically came up with a very wide-ranging blueprint of reform on how were we going to fix these problems to give this community the police department that it demands and deserves. And so out of that investigation and out of those negotiations, the city and the Department of Justice came up with an 18-part consent decree, which consists of 492 paragraphs, and it runs the gamut from use of force investigations, misconduct investigations, performance evaluations of officers, officer wellness issues, supervisory issues, bias-based policing practices and how to reduce such, in order to not just change the practices of the New Orleans Police Department, but to literally change the culture of the New Orleans Police Department so that those reforms were no longer reforms at the end of this road, but were in fact just the way that we do policing and the way that we expect to do policing. And so we've now been in this for 11 years, and we think that we've demonstrated that there's this series of reforms and systems of accountability that will ensure this, that this is so baked into the culture that these reforms will not go away just because this document goes away.
Okay, and so you mentioned, the consent decree was born basically out of a lot of horrific acts that dated back decades.
Decades of horrific
and
acts,
we've been here now in 11 years, so it was implemented in 2012.
Yeah.
So, but how long will this consent decree last?
So that's a good question. So we entered the consent decree. The city signed the documentation in January of 12. The federal monitoring team was hired in mid 2012 or so, and strike that, it was January 13, and then the federal team was hired in mid 2013. It will last as long as it needs to last. There is no set timeline, although the consent decree had some goals that we would, start to wind down this period after, and I believe in the consent decree, it even says like 4 years or so. That was not binding because it was really dependent upon the city's performance in upholding the oath and the values that we all ascribe to, and upholding the promise that we made to our community to be a forward-leaning constitutional police department.
And we hear this term when we're talking about consent decree, full and effective compliance, all the time. What exactly does full and effective compliance mean?
Yeah. So that's a good question. And that determination is really made by the court. So our role within, and my bureau's role, but also generally the New Orleans Police Department's role and the City of New Orleans' role, is to provide evidence to the court that we are complying with the mandates of the consent decree, that we're complying with the standards that we've agreed to uphold. And then the monitoring team will then basically kind of let us know or give us feedback on when they believe that our evidence of compliance is sufficient to say that we have in fact complied with those areas. However, and this is really important, there's only one entity that can really make a compliance determination. That's the court. That's the U.S. District Court that oversees this consent decree. And so the U.S. District Court's made no compliance determinations, although there have been certainly recommendations made by the federal monitors. It is the court's purview. It's the court's right and responsibility to do so, and the court will make that compliance determination when the court feels that there's been sufficient evidence presented into the record.
And just to be clear, so you said the court gets to decide. So do officers have a say in this?
So no, officers and the police department in general, we do not have a say in when we're compliant. Our role is to demonstrate compliance and provide evidence of compliance, but the determination as to when we reach that goal is not made by us at all.
And you've been an officer for over 20 years. What do you think the biggest impact of the consent decree has been for the New Orleans Police Department?
Yeah. So there have certainly been wide-ranging impacts. This is a very thorough document which touches on a number of different aspects of the police department. But in my mind, it boils down to this. Prior to the police department, if there was a problem within the organization, either systemic, individual, or group problem, the department's response was to deny, or hide, or just kind of ignore that problem, right? Since we've set up these systems of accountability, when there is a problem that is identified within our systems or within our structure or within our organization or individual or group or organizational-wide problems, the department's response is to meet those problems head on, to identify what are those areas of concern, what is the logical chain of events that brought us here, the root cause analysis of why we have that problem occurring, and then to apply corrective action plans to that problem, and then evaluate whether those corrective action plans actually addressed or remediated that identified deficiency. And really, that's what this consent decree has done, and that's what a good, well-functioning organization does, is identify problems as they arise and work to correct them. Because if you're not aware of a problem, you're certainly not doing anything to correct it. And if you're not correcting a problem, it's not going to go away on its own.
So I just want to clarify a couple things. We said that the court decides findings of full and effective compliance. So to be clear, right now, is the NOPD in full and effective compliance with the consent decree?
So the New Orleans Police Department believes that we're in compliance. However, the court has not made an official ruling, so thus there is no finding of full effective compliance.
So for our listeners, I just want to jump in here and explain that in some consent decrees that are being administered across the country, there are what are considered piecemeal or on-the-moment rulings of full and effective compliance with the different chapters of their consent decree. So that means, like, if they're under a consent decree for, say, photo lineups, use of force, and misconduct investigations, when photo lineups reach full and effective compliance, the judge would rule in that moment when there was evidence of this that the department has reached full and effective compliance in that chapter. However, here we're under a model where the judge wants to rule on the entirety of the consent decree of full and effective compliance. She is not making rulings as the process continues on individual sections. So whenever we say a chapter of the NOPD's consent decree is in compliance, what are we really saying, Chief Gernon?
What we're really saying is that the federal monitoring team and the Department of Justice have made a compliance recommendation to the court.
Thank you. Yes.
It's a recommendation.
It's
Only
a
the
recommendation.
court can solidify it or determine it to be so, right?
Right.
And the court has determined that she is not going to do that until all sections of the consent decree. And when I said that there were 18 sections, one of them is administrative. So
Right.
there are 17 sections of the consent decree that are that have a compliance determination, if you will.
Correct.
Yeah.
And again, just for our listeners who are like, well, I've reviewed the consent decree. I don't see all 17 or 18 of those sections. To be clear, some of those are now amendments, right? They were added after the original document was written.
We have amended the consent decree 2-3 times maybe in the last
Correct.
12 years. It didn't necessarily add sections. It amended specific paragraphs. Of the 492 paragraphs, there's like 430 of them that are actually actionable paragraphs.
Correct.
If you look at the sub-paragraph requirements, there's like 730 things that have to happen, that have to be, sufficiently completed, if you will, to determine whether something's full or effective compliance. But I don't believe we added complete sections. We've modified, specific paragraphs, because this happened in 2012 and 2013, right?
Right, it did.
Policing marches on, and we'd hope that there's progress made in our society. 12 years later, this document is not a living, breathing document. It had to be kind of updated to, bring it into alignment with today's reality. We can't live in the reality of 2012. We have to live in the reality of 2024.
Correct. And I would even argue, as a monitor who has to review the consent decree a lot, that the consent decree is not actually in as relevant as it could be. Like, there's nothing about, say, drones
Or body-worn cameras.
Or body-worn cameras.
Yeah, so when the consent decree
Yeah.
first came online and was negotiated, body-worn cameras were not nearly as ubiquitous as they are now.
No.
And we actually had to add them into some specific paragraphs, but we use body-worn cameras far and away beyond what the consent decree, because the original iteration of it had no body-worn camera issue, and then now we've moved into an area where body-worn cameras are everywhere. Every time an officer steps out of their vehicle to interact with a citizen in an official capacity, 3 cameras turn on: the camera on their chest, the camera that points out the front of their car, and the camera that points out the back of the car to look at the prisoner area of the vehicle.
That is 100% correct. And I flagged this only to demonstrate that the consent decree often is seen as being the Constitution, the embodiment of
Yeah.
everything that is important to our community, the embodiment of everything that's important to what it is to constitutionally police. However, it actually is not.
I think that's a really good point, that the consent decree does not contain everything that's important and a priority to our community or to our organization or to our city. It was simply it was a mechanism to correct harms that occurred and that existed in 2012, and it could not see into the future, and it did not, and it is not, the embodiment of everything that we hold to be valuable.
Right. There are things that exist. We've heard it from the community multiple times. There's a lot of concerns around how African American community members are treated.
Yes.
And there's a feeling that that is not embodied enough in the consent decree. So I only highlight that to say that whenever we talk about policing priorities, sometimes we are talking about things that are captured within the consent decree, and sometimes we're talking about things that are not captured within the consent decree, but we would argue exist within the spirit of maybe what the consent decree is trying to do.
Correct.
All right. So thank you for that clarification. So now let's talk about sustainment. What is sustainment?
Yep. So the sustainment period and the accompanying sustainment plan is a set of guidelines in which we have basically supplemented some recent corrective actions that we've put in place, or some, let's just call them gaps that were in the original document of the consent decree, that these are things that we've kind of noticed over the years that really need some more attention or some more time to see if the corrective actions. Remember, I talked about the corrective action loop, if you will, to see if those corrective actions, to evaluate whether they're working. Some of those corrective action plans have gone into the sustainment plan, and the period itself is a 2-year period that we're asking the court to start the clock on, to put us into. And during that 2-year period, we will basically, the Department of Justice and the federal monitors will kind of withdraw some of that close technical support that they've given us over the years. Think of it as taking the training wheels off, and we will test the systems. We're going to test the systems to see if they work. And if they don't work, the judge and the court has the ability to pause the sustainment period so that whatever time period we need to fix whatever systems aren't working does not go towards that 2-year period. Or the court has the ability to terminate the sustainment period and return us into the conditions we find ourselves in today.
So before we get off that analogy, because I like that analogy, removing the training wheels, that suggests, so if I was literally a child that was learning how to ride a bike and we removed the training wheels, it would be normal for me to say, fall a couple times.
Perhaps. And it would also be normal, because people are thinking the monitors and the DOJ will go away, for if you're helping your child and you remove the training wheels and you let them go, you're not going to then go inside or go down the street or maybe go on vacation. You're going to sit there and watch your kids go down the street without their training wheels on to make sure that they don't fall and to pick them up if in fact they do. So it is a apt analogy for somebody that's a father of a 2-year-old.
Yes. Yes, as a mom of a toddler who's going to be learning to ride a bike hopefully soon, I agree. And so I'm underscoring this analogy to suggest that there is going to be a certain amount of falls that might be normal.
I think we'll identify problems. We'll identify falls. We will fall. We will skin our knee. We will get back up. Our parents will come over and dust us off and help us course correct. We'll figure out what happened. We'll figure out how to avoid that from happening again. And we'll continue to move forward until one day, we're riding our bike down the street and our parents do go inside.
Right. But say if the wheels fall off, if we have a serious problem, then
we'll take the whole bike and throw it in the garage and start all over.
Start all over. Yeah. Okay. So, so how long does sustainment last?
It's a good question. The sustainment period is a 2-year period. However, if there are problems that need to be corrected, it can be paused. And so it could certainly extend beyond 2 years, or it can be terminated. And thus, so 2 years is what we're asking to prove that our systems work. But if our systems don't work as intended, it could certainly be extended.
Okay. And again, I just want to flag for the community that's maybe listening, we have seen jurisdictions enter into consent decrees and then go into sustainment and then be taken out of sustainment.
Yep, it's happening in Seattle right now. And they had a partial compliance finding, right?
Right.
Where they knocked out all but 2 sections of their consent decree and allowed them to demonstrate that, those last 2 sections. And they had some, I'll use the term backsliding, if you will. And that is about my level of knowledge as to what's going on in Seattle. But if, that is basically, it's a mechanism that the court has. It's a protection that the court has that the court can, implement if need be.
And Seattle's an interesting example that's worth looking at, because one of the reasons why they entered back into active federal oversight, even when they were in sustainment, was for how they handled the protests in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. And that was not anticipated in their original consent decree. However, the way that department responded to some of those protests was so concerning to the court and concerning to the community that they were effectively added on to their consent decree requirements. So it was a new expectation that was put into place by the court, and then they were put under active oversight for that new expectation. And that is worth noting, because that is also an option that is available to our court today.
It is. And I think that it's important that you kind of told that story, because people need to know that officers, community members need to know this is not the beginning of the end. This could be the beginning of a new phase, a new chapter, or a beginning of, return to local control. It really depends on how well this city performs. If we perform poorly, I fully expect that the court will take notice and take the appropriate remedies.
All right. That is good for the community to know.
So, Chief Kernan, what happens to the consent decree, though, during sustainment period?
Nothing. All of the requirements that were present under the consent decree stay under the consent decree. There will be some added requirements that are found in the sustainment plan. You can go to our website and read it. You can go to the court's website and read it. I would encourage people to do so. And then there are also some added reporting requirements that the police department will be making some reports quarterly to the community, the city council, and the court to give updates on the sustainment period and plan's progress. There will also be some additional checks and balances that will be put into place. So right now, when we do an audit, the DOJ and the federal monitors look at it, there'll be other entities and parties brought in to look at them as well.
And you talk about the sustainment plan and strategy. What is that?
Yeah, so that's a good point. It is a written agreement, or it's a filing that the Department of Justice and the City of New Orleans put into the record, asking the judge to approve that this is how we're going to move forward over the next 2 years. Here are the additional responsibilities of the city. The rights and responsibilities and powers of the court were not diminished at all. The same for the federal monitors, the DOJ. Everybody retains their original rights and responsibilities and power. However, there's additional onus on the city to demonstrate that the systems that we built over the last 11 and a half, 12 years work, and that they work without the technical support of the DOJ and the monitors day in, day out.
And you said it's a written agreement. So who exactly wrote it?
Yeah. So it was not written by one person or even one party, right? It was a collaboration between the federal monitoring team, the Department of Justice, and the City of New Orleans.
And in that collaboration, the public was mentioned. So if the public would want something different
Yep.
in a sustainment strategy, what would happen?
Right. So that's the point of these feedback sessions. So we filed this motion on September 27th. Within minutes of filing the motion, the court released another court order instructing each of the parties to do community outreach and collect community feedback for distribution and documentation to the court. The court also put out an email address that people can send their feedback directly to the court. I would encourage you, do not allow me or anybody else to be your gatekeeper of your voice. Email the court directly and let them know. And I will tell you, clerk@laed.uscourts.gov, right? Let the court know what your thoughts are. The court also put out the literal mailing address in the event that you want to mail them a letter. The court will have a fairness hearing at some point where people will be able to come and speak their voice to the court. However, I will warn you that it'll likely be limited time, right? You're not going to have an hour to speak to the court. So if you really want to have a substantive discussion, you should probably do so in an email or a letter. Then the court also instructed the entities involved, the U.S. Department of Justice, the Federal Monitoring Team, and us, to have community outreach. So as of last night, we've had 9 community in-person meetings. We've also done 2 Instagram live meetings because we understand that people can't always come to our place at a certain time and a date and what have you with, the burdens of life, right? You're trying to raise a family, you're trying to work. You don't have time to come and sit and talk to me for an hour. So we've also done Instagram live where every comment, question, concern that's sent in through that is, memorialized in a memo sent to the court. You can also leave those comments on there. And what our real message is, and we've met with faith-based leadership, we've met with members of the Hispanic community, we've met with members of the business community, we've done outreach to the community, just the community through public meetings. Our real message is let your voice be heard. Good or bad, positive or negative, give the court your feedback on this because this is an important aspect for our community. This is an important change for our community. This is important for our community's future. And if you let somebody else take your voice, then I would encourage you to not allow that to happen.
So I just want to underscore what I'm hearing and make sure that I understand. What I'm hearing is that these public forums are an opportunity for us to do 2 types of feedback. One that is backwards looking, where
Correct.
we're talking about how NOPD has performed over the last decade, how NOPD is complying with the consent decree. And then a second type of feedback that's forward facing.
Correct.
About what the sustainment strategy includes and what we would like to see happen next.
I think that's a fair characterization. And I think it's important that, to your point, right, was the community involved in writing the sustainment plan itself? The community is now involved in writing the sustainment plan itself by giving the court feedback on what concerns the community may have so that the court may take that into consideration when eventually an order is issued on this very important matter.
Okay, so even if you're listening to this show right now and you may not have much of an opinion about how NOPD has complied with the exact elements of the consent decree yesterday, but you have a strong hope or vision for what you want to see NOPD do tomorrow, that is still a reason to submit a comment. You should submit the comment saying, this is what I want to see NOPD do next, because that might be incorporated into sustainment. So we say that just to remind people that you can be looking backwards and forwards when you're providing your comment.
And even if it's not, let's say, put into the official court order, if it's something that we see and we think to ourselves, this is something that we ought to do, whether it's in sustainment or not, we're going to do it. Remember, body-worn cameras weren't in the consent decree, but it was something that we thought was important to do, right? There are a number of reforms that are not necessarily consent decree driven, but they're important to our community. So this is not our Constitution. I like that phrasing. This is not a resuscitation of all things that we hold dear, or our value system, if you will. There might be instances where you give us feedback and it doesn't make it into the sustainment period, but it certainly becomes something that we take into consideration and implement.
And I just want to underscore how important that is, because just like we talked about drones were not a component of the consent decree, nor are drones a component of the sustainment strategy. However, the NOPD is still prioritizing public feedback on drones and monitors concerns on drones. And I think another example of this is the new social work arm of some of our police districts that are coming into existence.
Correct.
Now. Our
Correct.
pilot programs
Yep.
that are happening in the 3rd district. They're happening in the 6th district, I believe.
Yep.
And so we now have social workers that are going out and responding to some community concerns.
Yeah.
And another example of this is community-based mediation that is happening in some of our police districts.
Yep.
So these are all priorities, and these should be priorities to the community. I mean, I hope that they're priorities that the community shares with our office.
I'll give another example that is near and dear to my heart. Law enforcement assisted diversion, the LEAD program, where
Yes.
we find somebody that is a low-level offender that really they're doing so because they need connection to social work and social help and community outreach. Usually it's coexisting mental health and substance use disorders occurring at the same time. We now give our officers another tool. Instead of bringing them to jail or to the hospital, we can bring them to a social worker working through the City of New Orleans Health Department or on a contractual basis. None of that was in the consent decree.
Right.
None of it was mandated by the consent decree.
Right.
But it's something that we value, and we think that all of our people are important, not just those living in nice houses, but also perhaps those living in tents underneath the overpass. And so it was our goal to create a better outcome for them in a harm reduction model. None of it was consent decree driven, related, or mandated.
Right. And the reason why we're talking about this so much is because I want to unmarry any idea that police reform has to happen under a consent decree, and that communities' concerns can only be considered if they're a factor of the consent decree.
Correct.
And that innovation or progress can only happen if it's happening in the name of the consent decree.
That's a good point.
That is not true. So I want the community to understand that no matter what happens with the consent decree, the work continues, and we want the community to be the community needs to be the driver of that work, and their priorities should be the focus of that work.
Yeah.
And I don't want people to feel discouraged or like, what's the point? The consent decree is coming to an end. Because I've heard that over and over again. What's the point of engaging? The consent decree is going to end. There is a lot of reasons to engage. There's a lot of reasons to care, whether the consent decree is here or not. How you are policed matters. And I know if you're listening, you're like, duh, that's why we're listening to this. but I'm saying it. I'm saying it for me. I'm saying it for anyone out there who might be feeling discouraged.
May I give you another perspective?
Yes.
Oftentimes, people think, okay, we've worked on a problem and we've solved it, put a check mark next to it and go on.
Right. Let's
That
check
is-
that box.
Yeah, check that box. That is not how it works in government and especially in policing organizations. You must be constantly vigilant to improve. And if you're not constantly looking to improve, you will become a dysfunctional organization and you will fall behind the practices of the time. So it's much like cutting your grass and having a manicured lawn. You can cut your grass and it'll be beautiful, right? But you don't just do that, at the end of March and then it's beautiful for the rest of the summer. You have to maintain and keep up that lawn. You have to do the same thing for your police department. And you have to
Right.
literally do the same thing for your government. It's not just the police department. If you're not constantly maintaining and improving and testing the systems and making sure that everybody is in fact working towards the same common goals, then you will have slippage, you'll have backsliding, and 30 years from now we'll look back and say, yeah, the department was a good department for the standards of 2024, but the standards of 2064 or 54 are going to be different.
They are. And again, we just want to talk about this because so there isn't a lot of examples to look to of other cities that have successfully ended a policing-based consent decree. So we end up looking to other consent decrees that might be similar in model, and then we look to see what has historically happened when those agencies that were under those consent decrees, when it ended. And one industry that we tend to look to is the prison population. Our prisons have been under consent decrees for longer than our police departments, and they have entered and exited consent decrees a little bit more rapidly, maybe, than we would see our police departments do this. But my point is that historically there has been slippage with our prisons after they exit their consent decree. That effectively, they operate effectively when they're under a consent decree, and then when the consent decree ends, they stop operating effectively. And so we always need to be aware of that possibility. And for that reason, if truly we are responsible for now being our own gardeners of this lawn, of this environment that we're building, this landscape, then we need to be vigilant and we need to work together and stay engaged to make sure that we keep up on all of this stuff. Otherwise, we too will experience backsliding, and we don't want that. We never want to go back to the NOPD that was experienced, truthfully, before the consent decree, and even for some people, they would argue still. There's always work to be done, consent decree or not. There's always work to be done, and we want the community to be a part of it.
Yeah, and look, from a police perspective, we should always be looking to perform and improve.
Yes.
So we're saying the same thing: is that if we're not improving, then we're failing.
Exactly. I love that. So I just want to quickly ask, is there anything about Troop NOLA in the sustainment strategy?
There's not. The judges made clear that the state police are not subject to the mandates of the consent decree, and in keeping with that, from the bench opinion, no, Troop NOLA is also not included in the sustainment plan.
Okay. And in our last show, we had the organization STAR on, Sexual Trauma and Awareness Response. And they brought up that they are still identifying problems with the sex crime investigations that are being conducted. They said that in a recent report that was issued by the federal monitors, there was an alarming rate of noncompliance, and they underscored the amount of uncleared sex crime investigations. They were saying that the clearance rate is around 3%. Is that a part of the sustainment strategy at this time?
Many of those concerns are not in the sustainment strategy. There's a few things in there about ensuring that victims and survivors are connected to services, even if the initial police officer doesn't get there. However, it doesn't mean that we're not working on it. I have on my books next Tuesday, in 3 or 4 days, a meeting with some advocates to go through in detail, and not just me, to go through in detail with the Special Victims Division, some of their concerns, and just as importantly, some of their solutions to these concerns, so that we can continue to better this system. So we will always be looking for what's the next deficiency, gap, problem with an eye towards correcting it. And that's what a successful organization does.
Okay. And before we move off this topic, I just want to be clear. Any corrective action strategies that are in place, what happens to them during sustainment?
We continue to work them.
Okay.
And they're included in the sustainment plan, and there are some very specific timelines that the court will expect us to meet should the court, issue that as an order.
Okay. And I see that we received a comment from a member of the public. Please ask Chief Gernon how much influence outside entities have on NOPD. For example, businesses, civilian and police organizations, because often the people feel powerless. The consent decree must stay until the community has confidence in the NOPD. Do you have a response to that?
Yes. So we are constantly seeking, in this instance, this is a good example of it, looking for feedback on how to improve. I will tell you that if you feel powerless, it's just because we haven't done a good enough job of showing you where your power is. The Office of Independent Police Monitor is, first off, your first stop to helping you navigate and empowering you to find a solution to your issue. Our council members are extremely responsive to community concerns. I've been a district commander in 2 different districts. I know that if there was a problem that a council member got an email about, their number one response was usually to forward to us and give us here's a problem, what are you going to do to fix it, right? So our council members are another resource because they're elected officials, and we kind of tend to think of them on this, pedestal that they're untouchable. They are out there every single day, and they will be responsive. I know it because I've seen the push from them to resolve issues that are brought to them by their constituency, and they do it on a regular basis. I would venture to say that every council member has all of their district commanders' direct cell phone numbers in their phones, and that there's an ongoing communication to them about constituents' concerns. So that's 2 examples of ways that you can empower yourself, and ways that you can find, a way to push your concerns to the forefront of the department. And there are many others.
I'm going to add your police community advisory boards.
Yes.
We want to see those be as empowered as possible. But what about the first part of that question? Can you tell us what influence, say, businesses have on the priorities of our police department?
Our business community is a part of our community. So our business community's concerns are taken in the same regard that our community members' concerns are taken. So I think that it's fair to say that they absolutely have influence, much like our faith-based leaders have influence, and other organizations have influence on the direction of the department.
Okay, and say there is a business organization or some type of association that's submitting public comment, those will be released to the public as well, too.
Correct.
So we'll be able to see
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
anything that's submitted by them. Okay. So I want to jump into some of this public pushback that we've received, and some of the public concern that we've received to the idea that NOPD is considering sustainment when they're not in full and effective compliance with all areas of the consent decree yet. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so that's a valid concern, and I will tell you that nobody gets to make a full and effective compliance determination but the court. So we make recommendations. We think that we're there on the vast majority of the consent decree, or we think that we've made, for instance, this is an example of this, the performance evaluation section. We think we've made significant progress, demonstrating progress over time that is sustainable. So obviously we think we're there, but there is no compliance determination made until the court makes a compliance determination.
And Chief Gardner, you mentioned, that NOPD thinks that you're all in full and effective compliance with the vast majority of the consent decree. So how do you respond to community members who think NOPD should wait until they're in full and effective compliance with all parts before moving into sustainment period?
So as I said, there is also the mechanism to move into the sustainment period if we are demonstrating substantial improvement in sections, and which allows us to show that, hey, we have a system that has set up that is improving this section. But that is what this 2-year sustainment period does, is allow us to finish off that work, to kind of polish off some of those last remaining areas. I think performance evaluations, to me, is the cleanest example. A few years ago, we were in the 20 percentile range for compliance. Now we're in the 70 percentile range for compliance. That demonstrates some, great level of improvement. But 70% is not 90%, right? So we continue to kind of march towards that. But we also think that we have a system that's set up that is also going to be codified, for lack of a better term, in the sustainment plan that will, get us to that goal.
I will say that that also additionally, I mean, the Department of Justice seems to agree with that. So
I think
thing.
that's fair.
yeah.
That's fair.
So if the department, this is now a community question. We've received another community question. If the department is operating above board and with confidence, what is the issue with having citizen oversight?
Yeah, I think that there are different models for oversight. The independent police model is the one that was codified in the city charter pre-consent decree. I will remind everybody. The IPM's office was here before the consent decree. They're here during the consent decree. They will be here after the consent decree. And that is the model that New Orleans has chosen to avail itself to. And I believe that that is the model. And I'm going to say this here, and I'll just leave it out there. When properly resourced, an independent police office, independent police monitor's office is can have the same effect as a federal monitor or some sort of other model of police reform and accountability.
Okay. So let's talk more about the public. At some of the public forums that have been held virtually by the federal monitors, a question has come up about the idea of public surveys.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about utilizing public surveys as a measurement of compliance?
I love it, and I will tell you, if you look at the sustainment plan, it's in there that we will conduct our survey during the sustainment period. It will likely be conducted by the federal monitoring team, as it has been in the past, using the same kind of metrics, so you can do an apples to apples comparison. And I, not only do I like it, we liked it enough that it's in our proposed sustainment plan.
Okay. I'm going to interject here and say that as a monitor, I would have preferred if there was a public survey conducted prior to any fairness hearing, prior to any finding on sustainment, just so that way we could have a little bit more of a temperature check of the community and understand how the community feels, because I think it's a lot to ask the community to have to always participate in order to be heard. That's a big ask, as we've highlighted multiple times. And so I think the value sometimes of doing these surveys is you're able to have a baseline understanding of how people believe that NOPD is complying and performing. And then we can move on from there, instead of always asking people to take time off work, show up to this forum, or take time off work, show up to court for the fairness hearing. And
well, may I?
Yeah.
I appreciate your view on that, and I don't disagree. However, we are also giving people a number of different ways to give feedback. You don't have to take time off work. You can send an email. You can shoot a comment in on an Instagram live. You can post comments online. You can send a letter in the mail. You don't have to come to a time and place, because, I mean, we perfected this during the pandemic, right? You don't have to be in a time and place to have your voice heard, right? So although the use of a public survey is one way to take a temperature, another way to take a temperature is to ask the community for their thoughts on this, and as importantly, make it widely known how to do so. And I guess I was remiss in not saying the deadline for submission is November 8th.
November 8th, it is coming up.
Yep. So September 27th, we asked for public feedback, and the court has kind of set a deadline for feedback on November 8th. And there may be people that say, well, we have Taylor Swift in town this week, and we got the election next week, and we got Halloween. Yes, but we've got something always in this town. We are a very busy place. It's one of the reasons I love it here. That's one of the reasons I live here with my family. So we have a 6-week or so period from September 27th to November 8th for anybody that wants to write a letter directly to the court, or to avail themselves to any one of those feedback mechanisms. So while I appreciate your thoughts on it, and I don't disagree, I also don't think that we lose anything by doing a public survey during the sustainment period, knowing that the court can toll or terminate the sustainment period at any time.
So when you say toll, I just want to quickly define that. That
Pause.
means pause. Okay.
So let's say we're doing a 2-year sustainment period, and there's a problem that the court says you need to fix this problem. I am tolling, pausing the sustainment period. Maybe the sustainment period is not 2 years. Maybe it's 2 years and 6 months because it took us 6 months to fix the problem. Maybe it's 3 years because it took us a year to fix the problem. We won't get credit for the time that the sustainment period is paused or tolled towards that 2-year period.
All right, that's really good to know. So I just want the community to know that another thing you can also ask for is more time. So think outside the box in terms of the feedback that you want to submit. And if there is a feeling of a lack of confidence in this police department, one request you can make is for a longer sustainment period.
You certainly could.
You certainly could. You could. So I'm throwing it out there to see. You throw it out there to see who picks it up.
I'll also say, if there's a problem during the sustainment period, you could request it to be told.
Yes, while that problem is fixed and addressed, or a creative action strategy is put into place. That is 100% true. Now, I see we're coming up on time. I want to quickly read out that there are 3 public forums coming up. I put them in the chat as well. One will be held on Monday, October 28th. It will be held at Loyola University's Law School in room 112. It will be held from 5:30 to 7 p.m. That will be held with the federal monitors. That's an in-person one.
And the Department of Justice is going to attend.
Oh, okay.
So their
That's good
lawyers
to
can
know.
hear the things that are being discussed.
The Department of Justice will be there. So, and then there will be another one held on Tuesday, October 29th. That will be held at Nora Navra Library in the 7th Ward. That's 1902 St. Bernard. And that will be from 11 a.m. to 12:30, so kind of like this lunch period. And then there will be another public forum held in New Orleans East at the New Orleans East Library, the large meeting room. That will be at 5641 Reed Boulevard. And that will be from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. As always, you can submit comments directly to the clerk or to the Federal Monitors or to us. The Federal Monitors website is, email is aburns@concentricremonitor.onmicrosoft.com. The email address that I've told them multiple times I hate. And
May I?
yes.
People should take note that Reed Library, New Orleans East Library location, it changed because it was originally Joe Brown Park. So if people heard that last week,
Yes.
they should be aware, not Joe Brown multipurpose
Joe
room,
Brown.
the Reed Library.
The Reed Library. So, in our final moments, I would like to know, what impact do you think the fairness hearing is going to have on the NOPD?
Yeah. On the NOPD or on the sustainment period ruling?
I'm going to ask about both, but first I want to hear, what are you planning to take away from the fairness hearing?
I am not just looking at the hearing itself because I think it'll be a very limited time period for people to discuss their concerns. I am looking at what I think, to me, I'm going to answer what takeaway am I going to have from the entire feedback process. I'm looking for what our community tells us we need to do to get better. Because what we need to do to get better is what we need to do to regain and to build trust.
Okay. And I'm going to read out loud this comment that we just received. Just the problems with the manpower, the promotion processes, the mayor's fraternization, and payroll fraud are enough to say no to exiting the consent decree. So now so we've said that public comment
That's good.
aloud.
Those are actionable items that we have said, you know what, these are things that the public wants us to fix, and it's our job to do so.
Okay. So I do want to note that that we've heard multiple times that PCABs need to be a bigger component of our sustainment period, a bigger component of our time right now. What plans are in place to improve our PCABs and ensure community feedback is included in policing?
Yeah, I think we could probably spend an hour talking about PCABs, but
I would love to spend an hour talking about PCABs.
But just know that, and I will find the appropriate folks to do that with, that the PCAB topic was so important to the court that, and to the parties involved, that it is a TBD, it is a blank spot in the sustainment plan, so that that plan can be refined and improved upon before we start kind of thrusting it out there, if you will.
And I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I just have to say, there are people that are going to hear that and say, I disagree.
Yeah.
I
I
disagree
heard that
it's
last
that
night.
important.
Yeah.
Because if it was that important, why is it TBD? If it's that important, why hasn't it been a court hearing yet? If
Yep.
it's that important, why isn't there more happening on it? So I
Va-
just
valid concerns,
and I'm
and
sorry,
I would recommend
just-
sending those to the court.
Who's involved in this
the,
plan?
the same folks that wrote the sustainment plan are in fact crafting the draft of the PCAB plan for public consumption and feedback. So I would say that, again, if you want your voice to be heard on this, make your voice heard on this through those avenues that we discussed earlier.
And I do think I did an injustice to PCABs by bringing it up so late. So I think we might take you up on the offer to have a
Fair.
full hour talking
Yeah.
about PCABs because honestly, they deserve a full hour and then some.
I agree.
So thank you so much for coming on. And we're going to close out. You've given us so much great information, but thank you for taking this time.
So that wraps up today's episode of the Monitor's Mic. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all our listeners for tuning in and staying engaged with the crucial conversations we're having about police oversight and community safety. A special thank you to Deputy Superintendent Gernon for his time and invaluable insights he shared, making today's show possible. If you missed any part of today's show or want to catch up on past episodes, visit our website, www.nolaipm.gov. You can find and follow us on YouTube at NOLA IPM, and you can also follow us on social media for updates and news on Instagram at NOLA OIPM and on Facebook at New Orleans Independent Police Monitor. Until next time, stay informed, stay involved, stay committed to building a safer community. I'm Kershelle McGowan with Stella Cement, and this has been a Monitor's Mic.